Tonight on Free Minds TV, we talk about protesters getting pepper sprayed in California. Plus, we have video that explains the new proposed Protect IP legislation to you. Plus, something interesting happened to me at the Ron Paul rally tonight. That coming up on Free Minds TV.
Welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
This is the 231st regular episode we've recorded, so welcome very much. We have a lot to be getting into. We will be talking about the internet and hopefully keeping the internet the same as it is right now, kind of the wild, wild west of the world, as governments kind of crack down on freedoms across the world.
Especially since we spend so much of our lives on the, at least if you're living in the West, we spend so much of our time on the internet.
The Western world.
Right, whether it's socializing with people, consuming media, conducting business. I mean, so much of our lives take place, for better or for worse. Some people like it, some people don't, but so much of our lives takes place on the internet now, Toby.
Well, personally, I like that you can search for whatever you want. I like that you can say whatever you want. I like that you can sign up for Match.com and put in your weight as 20 pounds less than it really is. I like that being legal. Certain people and certain interests do not want that to be legal. They want that to be a crime. They also want to make it the government's job to force search engines like Google to censor their results so you can't look up any copyrighted infringing material or anything. We'll be getting into that in the second half of the show. But first, I want to talk about this pepper spraying event that probably most of you have heard of by now. Probably by the time you're watching this, it's kind of drifting off into the old news because it did just happen this weekend. We're recording the show earlier in the week and then it premieres later in the week. So by the time you're hearing this, it's probably drifting off into the older news. But I think it's important for people who just heard about it to also watch the video. And that's what I want to do. When I first read about it, I heard about it on talk radio. It didn't really move me as much as when I actually saw the image of what happened at the University of California this past weekend during one of the Occupy protest movements out there. So before we talk about the specifics of what happened and then the follow-up, I want you, the viewer, to get a chance to watch this video and then we'll get into it. Let's take a look. You know, at this point, Nick, it doesn't look necessary. It doesn't look like anybody is in danger where they need to be maced like this. It just doesn't look, it seems like they could, if they're creating an obstruction here in the sidewalk, the police officers could easily just step around them. There's only about a dozen or so of them there. They could just walk around them and eventually they're going to get bored or hungry or have to use the bathroom and they're going to move. It doesn't sound like...
It didn't seem like they were causing any kind of a crisis there.
Well, I just want to get into, before we talk about the specifics about what the whole point of how I thought about it anyways, or how it was explained to me when I was a really young warthog. I know that I'm not all that old right now, but when I was younger, it was explained that use of using non-lethal force such as pepper spray and tear gas and rubber bullets and beanbags and all that stuff was non-lethal force that's used in replace of lethal force. So under normal circumstances, would they have shot these protesters, and now this is the less lethal form, so they're just going to pepper spray them? I mean, is this really something?
Well, if you're going to use violence to break up a protest, Toby, you might as well go all the way, right?
No,
I mean, it'd probably be more effective if they just started shooting people with live bullets.
My point is, this is a non-violent
Well, apparently it's acceptable to exactly. So apparently it's acceptable to use violence to break up a non-violent protest and just mace college students because you don't like the fact they're protesting. So why don't we just shoot them?
I know that I've seen many macing videos during this Occupy thing on YouTube. It's all over. They say the whole world is watching. Not the whole world. People who are connected to the internet and kind of want to see an alternative to what some of the major media outlets are showing them. they're watching, they're paying attention to this. I'm paying attention to it. I've seen many people get maced, but usually there's some kind of an excuse that the police have, like the protesters are up in their faces and yelling or something. But in this video, what's so disturbing about it to me is they are just sitting there. They are being extremely passive with their heads down. They're sitting quietly on the sidewalk with their heads down. The police officer comes up with his big old fire extinguisher canister of bear mace, and they proceed to just douse the protesters. Then at the end, when their heads are down, I guess they weren't getting them enough, they started pulling their heads up a little bit so that they could really get it in their eyes, make it sting a little bit. It just seems so unnecessary. Those protesters wouldn't have been there all day. I know that some of the arguments of, well, these occupiers are staying there for weeks at a time and they're creating public health hazards and all that. Well, in this particular case, let's just talk about this particular case right now. They weren't. They were sitting there. They were in the sidewalk. They didn't have their tents pitched there. They would have left shortly. What was the urgency of these police officers making them leave immediately and bear macing them and then arresting them? They could have just arrested them. They were being very passive. I don't know what the point of macing them first was, just to make their eyes hurt. Is this also part of the punishment of if they're not following the orders? I do want to talk about some follow-up, though. The president of the University of California system said that he was appalled at the images of the protesters being doused with pepper spray and plans an assessment of the law enforcement procedures on all 10 campuses as the police chief and 2 officers were placed on administrative leave. Oh, they get a paid vacation. That's nice. Quote, free speech is a part of the DNA of the university, and nonviolent protest has long been a central piece of our history, UC President Mark G. Udoff said in a statement Sunday in response to the spraying of students sitting passively at UC Davis. It is a value we must protect with vigilance. And I agree. I think that no matter what the point of the protest is, once again, I'm not sure what some of these Occupy protests are about. I know we're the 99%. Where that vision is, I'm still not sure. I do think it's important to protest. I like the idea of being upset and going out there and protesting something. I think we need some vision as well. But I do agree with that statement. I think that Mark G. Udoff, the university president, is definitely onto something. Nonviolent protest is very important, and if we don't protect it, if the university doesn't protect it, I'm glad they are at least making some kind of a statement of saying they're protecting it. What's left? It's very troubling.
It would be
to
nice
watch.
if instead of a paid vacation, we gave officers like this a firing and then put them in prison.
Charged them with assault.
Which is where violent criminal offenders belong. And I made this point on the radio show yesterday. In some cases, okay, maybe there is a dispute about whether the police officers actually feared for their safety or about whether the protesters were being violent or harming property. But in many well-documented cases that you can go on to YouTube and watch, it's just the police using violence because they can. And if anybody else did this, if I walked over to a bunch of Occupy protesters, and the story I'm going to get into later in the show actually ties back into that. If I walk up to the Occupy protesters, because I don't really like the way they're protesting, and I spray them in the face with mace, I go to prison. These officers should too.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry for their families. That's about it.
Well,
but these officers,
fact,
I don't care if they end up as homeless bums when they get out. Just put them in prison because they are violent, dangerous people. That's what the police are supposed to be there to protect us from, right, Toby? They're supposed to protect our rights, protect our humanity from violent criminals who in many cases wear a uniform.
I've seen a lot of stormtrooper outfits, people masking their identities and going out and just acting like violent thugs out there in these protests.
I like in Oakland where they shot that veteran in the face with a tear gas canister too. That was good.
Yeah, I think we showed that video.
The guy survived 2 tours of duties in Iraq, but apparently a protest in Oakland is where he catches a round that almost kills him. That's real strong work there on the part of the Oakland PD. I'm just so unimpressed with police forces around the country. And I mean, there was a story we reported on the radio show, Toby. We were talking about New York City police officers assaulting a New York Supreme Court judge who was there at the protest as a legal observer. A sitting New York Supreme Court judge. I mean, they don't care anymore. It doesn't even matter if you're part of the judicial system. They don't even care. Well, they're just out of control.
Well, they're blindly following orders, Nick, is what's going on. They're being given orders by their
remember
superiors.
That excuse not working for
but
some
that's
other
what's
people
going
who
on
had
here.
some snazzy uniforms.
Their superiors are giving them orders, and they're going out and they're blindly following them. Well, guess what? If there's any of you stormtroopers watching, you don't need to. You can also think for yourselves.
Thankfully, I think in a lot of communities, we don't have police forces that tend to act like this. I think, we have.
Seems like every major city does, Nick.
Where
most people live
right.
Most people live under this rule.
I don't know what the reason for that. I don't know if it's because people don't have to interact on a day-to-day basis, whereas here in Keene, New Hampshire, where we do the show, it's a town of 25,000. So if the police officers are out there brutalizing the young people of town, odds are those police officers interact with those people or those people's parents, and so. I don't know if it's because in smaller communities people actually know each other and treat each other as human beings. I don't know if that's it or not. You're right, Toby. Usually when we're looking at these major metro areas, it's just the police forces there in many cases are just out and out scary, and I don't think they're much better off than police forces in other parts of the world that crack down on these protests.
No, I've seen other parts of the world actually handle it in a much more humane fashion than some of the major metro areas that we've been watching with these occupiers. And another thing that I just think is kind of sad but amusing is the police officers, the way they're handling this, the way the departments in many cases are handling this, are shooting themselves in the foot. Because these Occupy protests were actually starting to dwindle a little bit in the news. They weren't making the headlines. People were starting to leave, and it was just kind of starting to fall out. And then they go and have another wave of crackdowns like this in the news, and they spark right back up again. When are they going to learn? If you want the protesters to leave, just ignore them. And then it gets cold and they'd go away. But instead they're cracking down like stormtroopers and showing videos like this that millions and millions of people watch and get outraged about. So I mean, I guess, is that good in a sense? I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell. I'm sure we'll have more videos like this to talk about, but I do want to move on. I am happy right now that we're able to watch this video. The reason we were able to share it with you, the reason that many of you watched it is because of sites like YouTube, the internet, where there is still freedom to post what you want and share it with people and interact on voluntary basis without really much intrusion by the government. Yes, there are laws out there that govern the internet and people can sue each other, but you still have the right to put stuff there and search for it, and if you want to download something that's illegal and then get sued for it, well, you still have the ability to do that. But not if some of the bigger movie industries and government have their way. There's a couple of bills that may go through currently. One is called the Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, and the other is Protect IP. These two bills that are sailing through the House and Senate right now, they could really, really hinder free speech, the ability for corporations like Google and Yahoo and other search engines, Yahoo, Twitters of the world, to do what they do today. They can also hinder current startup companies and make it really easily for them to get sued and go out of business. I know I could ramble on about it, but instead I decided that to search the net and see if someone did a better job. And I found this Creative Commons video that kind of sums it up much more succinctly than I could do and does it more justice. So I want to take a look at this quick little video that kind of gives you an idea of what the Protect IP and right along the lines of Stop Online Piracy, what they're designed to do, what they actually will do, what some of the consequences of that are. So let's take a look and then we'll give our commentary on it.
The Internet is one of the United States' most robust and growing industries. It enables free and open communication among billions, and it's been the backbone for protests around the world. But a new bill proposes we give the power to censor the Internet to the entertainment industry. It's called Protect IP, and here's how it works. Private corporations want the ability to shut down unauthorized sites where people download movies, TV shows, and music. Since most of these sites are outside U.S. jurisdiction, Protect IP uses a couple different tactics within American borders. Firstly, it gives the government the power to make U.S. internet providers block access to infringing domain names. They can also sue US-based search engines, directories, or even blogs and forums to have links to these sites removed. Secondly, Protect IP gives corporations and the government the ability to cut off funds to infringing websites by having US-based advertisers and payment services cancel those accounts. In a nutshell, that's what Protect IP will try to do. But in all likelihood, it'll do something else altogether. For starters, it won't stop downloaders. You'll still be able to access a blocked site just by entering its IP address instead of its name. What Protect IP will do is cripple new startups because it also lets companies sue any site they feel isn't doing their filtering well enough. These lawsuits could easily bankrupt new search engines and social media sites. And Protect IP's wording is ambiguous enough that important social media sites could become targets. Lots of trailblazing websites could look like piracy havens to the wrong judge. Tumblr, SoundCloud, and early YouTube, wherever people express themselves, make art, broadcast news, or organize protests, there's plenty of TV footage, movie clips, and copyrighted music mixed in. And even if you trust the US government not to abuse their new power to censor the net, what about the countries that follow in our path and pass similar laws? People around the world will have very different internets, and unscrupulous governments will have powerful tools to hinder free expression. But perhaps most dangerously, Protect IP will meddle with the inner workings of the net. Experts believe by fiddling with the web's registry of domain names, the result will be less security and less stability. In short, Protect IP won't stop piracy, but it will introduce vast potential for censorship and abuse while making the web less safe and less reliable. This is the internet we're talking about. It's a vital and vibrant medium, and our government is tampering with its basic structure so people will maybe buy more Hollywood movies. But Hollywood movies don't get grassroots candidates elected. They don't overthrow corrupt regimes, and the entire entertainment industry doesn't even contribute that much to our economy. The internet does all these and more. Corporations already have tools to fight piracy. They have the power to take down specific content, to sue peer-to-peer software companies out of existence, and to sue journalists just for talking about how to copy a DVD. They have a history of stretching and abusing their powers. They tried to take a baby video off YouTube just for the music playing in the background. They've used legal penalties written for large-scale commercial piracy to go after families and children. They even sued to ban the VCR and the first MP3 players. So the question is, how far will they take all this? The answer at this point is obvious. As far as we'll let them.
And that came from fightforthefuture.org. From there, you can write to your congressman and tell them to fight this. And there are some lawmakers that are getting the hint and saying, wow, this really could cripple the internet. This actually will hurt a lot of companies out there. This will hurt individuals. And this will really take away that last place where there still is free speech, free expression, etc., etc. But then, of course, there's huge lobbying companies, the MPAA, the Recording Industry of America, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. These huge, huge corporations that don't represent you or I. They represent, well, big business. They don't like it. But there's also some big businesses out there that don't like it. For example, Yahoo has already canceled its membership in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce over SOPA, and Google is threatening to walk as well over the Stop Online Piracy Act because it's really what it does is it forces them to be the tools of the government. They could get sued if they don't filter their search engine. So say you're able to still search for something that has search for a website that has a link for copyrighted material in it, they could get sued. And that's why it makes it so hard for new search engines, new online startups, new social networking sites to start up because they have to police themselves. That would be a very, very costly venture. Even in the comment sections, you have to police the comment sections. So if you have a website or a blog or a social networking site and someone puts up a comment that has a link to somewhere where there's copyrighted material, someone posts a video that has copyrighted material in it, that website can get sued and shut down. It's ridiculous. They need to find these big giants like the recording industry in Hollywood. They just need to find a better way than trying to police everybody and crack down on the internet and shut down the internet because it's not working. People will still download. It will still happen. I'm sorry, people are going to do what's convenient for them. You want people to buy your content, make it convenient for them to get it, and they will.
Yeah, there was a time when it took a long time to move a lot of information over the web where there was piracy in the form of burning CDs or copying tapes. So you could do away with the internet entirely, and you would still have, as they pointed out, you would have to get rid of things like MP3 players, tapes, DVDs.
They're recording they tried to sue VCR because they didn't like the VCR coming into existence because you could record videotapes. I mean, it's every form of new technology they're not going to like, because it infringes on their business model. Well, guess what? Change your business model. As the world progresses, they should be progressing too. Adapt and change. Yes, now there's a lot of competition out there for you, Hollywood. Adapt to it. Find a way to still make money. There are ways. Many companies are figuring it out. Going around, you already figured out that suing individuals isn't going to work. You found out that suing the bigger companies like Kazaa and Napster isn't going to work. Now you're going to lobby Congress to force companies like Google to censor themselves and force smaller startups not to take place, to censor YouTube. It scares me a little, Nick, because the internet, as that video pointed out that we watched, it is where these protest movements take place. It allows people to connect in any way they like.
I mean, the first thing they tried to do in Egypt to really tamp down on the protests there, or the revolution really there, was to shut down the internet. So I mean and that's in a country where the internet penetration really isn't as great as it is in our society. So it shows you just how important of a tool it is. And they're not just trying to crack down through things like copyright law, Toby, to give corporations more power to decide what content to put up. They're also trying to put in place new legislation to control what you as an individual, what many of us do, which is put up information that might not be 100% accurate. And there are actually some pretty good reasons to do this. The U.S. Department of Justice is defending computer hacking laws that make it a crime to use a fake name on Facebook or lie about your weight on an online dating profile at a site like Match.com. The law must allow prosecutions based upon a violation of terms of service or similar contractual agreement with an employer or provider, according to Richard Downing, the Justice Department's Deputy Computer Crime Chief. So what they're saying here, Toby, is that if you don't put up your name as it actually is on Facebook, because it doesn't agree with Facebook's terms of service, well, if you do something that violates the terms of service, then you're liable to be prosecuted under this new Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, is what they're calling it. So a lot of people change their names on Facebook to protect their privacy, so it's easier to connect their Facebook profile with their real-world identity.
Yeah, I
makes
think
a lot of sense,
a good
actually.
idea, probably. I have several fake email addresses. I hope the Department of Justice isn't watching. I don't always want. Sometimes I want some anonymity. I want to be able to go on the internet in stealth mode. And if people really wanted to find out who I was, it's attached an IP address, which is directly attached back to my internet provider, Time Warner Cable. It's right there. Someone really wanted to dig in and find it, they could, but they want it to be just really obvious. Now, why is that, Nick? I think it could be because all this data, very, very useful, if it is accurate data. The government really likes being able to buy this data from Google, from Match.com, from all these companies on the citizenry. But it's not much use to them if they're buying loads of data and it's inaccurate. So how do we make all the data and how do we know everything about our citizens? Well, we force all that data to be accurate. Then we can easily just get huge amounts of data on all the citizens. Right,
and not to mention that a lot of businesses like to be able to accumulate this kind of information too, so they would have their own reasons for supporting legislation like this. And it may sound paranoid to some people, but yeah, the government and large corporations are tracking you as much as they can on the web. And they're becoming increasingly, it used to be a lot easier to be anonymous on the web. It's in some respects becoming a lot more difficult. If you're savvy, you can do it, but a lot of people don't know about things like BitTorrents, et cetera, et cetera. People don't know how to really encrypt things. So if you're not internet savvy, it's pretty easy for you to be tracked. And what's done with that information? Well, it's not the government collecting it per se. It's not even the companies that really want the information that are collecting it per se. It's just that they're the people who typically purchase it from websites and from internet service providers.
Yep.
So you're right, Toby. If it's accurate information, it's a lot more useful to whoever wants to use it, whether that's the government or a box store that wants to try to sell you, I don't know, their latest talking doll.
Yeah.
Holiday season is
Personally,
really upon us.
I like to be able to make up whatever fake names I want to for email addresses, for dating services and the like, although I don't think I've done that. I'd like to have the freedom to do
A little
so.
creepy there.
Yeah, right.
Anyway.
I'd like to, some people think that the internet should be regulated. A lot of people out there are upset with us because they think that the internet should be cracked down and regulated just like society is. Everybody should get in line and be good little citizens. If you don't have anything to hide, then what do you care? What do you care about all this stuff? Are you all criminals? If you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. Screw the Fourth Amendment. We don't need it. What, are you hiding something in your car? You don't care if the police take a look. You don't care if they knock on your door and take a look through. Well, why do you care about the computer? Same issues should apply. I say no. Let's have freedom of the internet. I say we keep it. I think it's important. If you disagree with me, well, I guess that's a scary world to live in as far as I'm concerned, but I guess we'll have to agree to disagree. We do, though, Nick, you did promise. You were at it, moving on. You were at an event just before we started the show.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I didn't make time to grab a camera because I didn't really know about the event until not too long before it happened. But Ron Paul actually came to Keene to speak at Keene State College, and it was a pretty well-attended event. I'd say there were, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 people. I don't know. So I'm bad at estimating group sizes. But there were many hundreds of people who showed up.
I know they had to change the venue to a larger space because of more people coming. So
yeah, so pretty well attended, and it was the typical presentation that you typically get at a Ron Paul. I don't know whether you call it a rally or an outreach event, but he went through his major talking points, like monetary reform, like reducing the federal government back down to its constitutional size. And right as we were getting towards the end, after a few questions had been asked and you could hear the people running the debate, or not really debate, but the presentation, started saying, yeah, I think this is the last question. Then we got the Occupy Wall Street protesters who had apparently decided to sit through the entire presentation. I'm glad they did, because whether their ears were open or not, they got exposed to a lot of new ideas. They're out there looking for them, I guess. Started their chant of "We are the 99%" and there's something wrong with this system and there are protesters in jail. But on a good note, Toby, Ron Paul kind of bounced back and said that in many ways he agreed with them, and that one thing he's been talking about a lot lately is how the top 1%, the bankers who screwed up the economy to a large extent, got bailed out when regular people didn't, and they got stuck with the bill. So it ended on a civil note.
Well,
nobody pepper sprayed each other.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of us in the crowd, including myself, were annoyed with the Occupy protesters, but I didn't take my can of Bear Mace and shove it in their face because the people in that room were civilized people.
Well,
unlike the people we showed in that video wearing the black uniforms before.
Well, I can see
people.
They probably were at the wrong candidate speech, because I mean, most of the candidates, they are status quo, but if there's one thing Ron Paul is not, it is status quo. He would have some sweeping, severe changes that the 1% probably wouldn't really like, at least many of them. Anyways, we're out of time this week. Join us next week for an all-new episode of Free Minds TV, freemindstv.com. In the meantime, it's been Toby.
And Nick.
Have a good one.